So this is the Why We Crave Humor and Fiction panel. My name is Patrick Pesser. I'm your host, right? I'm your moderator. I'm going to help you talk to these folks about all their wonderful things that they're going to say. Just for the sake of letting you know who I am, I'm a two-time Hugo Award winner. I'm a podcaster, an author, a blogger, and an all-around functional nerd. Okay? I love to come to Mile High Con. It's my favorite con. It's local to me. I live in Aurora. Nobody's going to go, ooh. Hey, we have the best water.
We do.
We do. My mom always complains about our water.
Yeah.
She lives in Aurora.
That's who I am. Let's talk about who these folks are. Betsy, why don't you go first?
So I have a name now. Betsy Dornbush is my name. Here it is. And I saw two more panels, so I was like, okay, I think I need my name thing. And I write epic fantasy typically. I do have an urban fantasy novel out, and I write short fiction too, and written some sex. And
At Starbucks?
Yeah, and I write a blog, Sex Scenes at Starbucks, which is all but dead. It's been a long, long time. And I also edit the magazine Electric Spec for one more issue, and then I'm retiring after 10 years.
She also did a phenomenal remodel in her bathroom.
Not sure how I can follow that. Carol Heishu, I am the publisher and editor for Wolfsinger Publications. I also edit the online magazine Lorelei Signal and Sorceress Signals with a full-time job. Trying to actually find time for writing again. Sorceress Signals will actually be going away after this next issue. I just don't have time to maintain both of them and the other, which is sad, but Lorelei has been around for over 10 years, and I'm very proud of being able to keep an online magazine going that pays at times. It pays, but it comes out of my paycheck going for that long. So please stop by, we take donations, and again, visit the dealer's room. So help my husband's back, buy a book.
And I'm sorry, as soon as she said Lorelei, I went to Netflix is bringing back Gilmore Girls.
My name is David Lee Summers, and by day I write steampunk and science fiction. This is my latest, Lightning Wolves, which my publisher Maggie Bonham likes me to share with you all. And Wild West steampunk, and I also write horror. I have a novel coming out called The Astronomer's Crypt, which is a horror novel set at an observatory, essentially a haunted house in a 17-story tall dome. By night, I operate telescopes at Kitt Peak National Observatory and outside of Tucson, Arizona, and currently in the process of transitioning over to having Department of Energy basically fund the Dark Energy Survey, surveying the entire sky, 3,000 objects at a pointing. And we'll be doing this for about 5 years, and on the other telescope I work on, NASA will be following up with planet atmospheres. So. Not sure that any of that has to do with humor and fiction, but it's interesting and fun. So.
And our final panelist is John, who is not here. He unfortunately had to go home, wasn't feeling well. So, sorry about that.
So he's patient zero?
Yes, apparently.
I'm pretty sure patient zero's in the back.
Yeah, patient zero's in the back.
Okay, he's patient one.
Infected one person already.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I walk in the room and you see that. We're not even
And I, just to throw it out there, I love nerdy t-shirts. I wear them all the time. And right now my favorite one is the Stargate SG-1.
Yeah.
Liking that. You got Richard Dean Anderson on the cover. That's pretty awesome. So, and I use it as a segue because I know we're going to talk about written fiction, but one of the things that I loved was how Stargate SG-1 slowly let Richard Dean Anderson put more and more of his personality and his humor in that show. And I am one who, I love to crack a joke. I will crack a joke at my own expense to make everybody laugh, because I just like to make people laugh. I think that some of the best fiction out there has humor in it, because we're human beings and we love to laugh. It doesn't have to be, why so serious all the time? It doesn't have to be. Betsy, do you put a lot of humor in your fiction?
I employ the Greek chorus typically, and you guys know what that is? the Greek chorus. It's, you know, it might be a sidekick or someone who
We're gonna see right here.
makes,
Second row.
makes jokes, typically at the expense of the very, of the protagonist who takes himself too seriously. That's sort of how so far, that's sort of how my books have turned out. I'm actually trying my hand in my new work at writing a point of view, funnier character. But I write really pretty dark, grim stuff, so it just, I mean, like, I need it, you know? And sometimes things are so absurd, you know, that you're just like, you know, it's like, I'm writing it and I have to make fun of it, so, you know. It's those characters, they take themselves so seriously. And I'm really mean to them, so they probably have reason.
And when you have something like, I don't know, like Address-In Files, where he's constantly getting the crap kicked out of him, you gotta have a sense of humor, right? What about the stuff that you're putting out?
Most of the stuff that I write, the humor is going to grow out of the character, you know, either something that happens with them or some type of humorous situation that occurs. I don't deliberately try to put humor in.
Sometimes it doesn't work.
Right,
It has to flow.
it has to flow with the
Yeah.
characters, and I don't write as dark of stuff to where I feel like, okay, we gotta have a break here, not
Right.
just for me and the characters, for the readers and stuff like that, but I do like to read it, and I do have some books that are very humorous that people have sent that I've loved. You know, we've got one up there that's involving Greek gods in Seattle, and it's just, it's not written to be a humorous book, but the book is humorous. And I really, really like that. And I've got some short stories that have come out that way just because the direction of the story just made it turn out to be, the ending of it became humorous, and I loved it.
By the way, Carol and I are gonna totally bond because she has a TARDIS on her necklace. We're gonna become best buds.
Okay.
How about you, Dave?
That's a warning.
Well, I think
Betsy knows me.
So I should be scared?
Yeah.
I kept my TARDIS stuff at home, so.
You're gonna have a lot of new friends.
That's fine.
How about you, Dave?
But yeah, it's really just, I think it's that whole outgrowth of what the characters, you know, what's natural for the characters. I think about this in terms of The Astronomer's Crypt especially, because it's the novel that's sort of closest to what my life is like, and I realize that, you know, just in day-to-day life, a lot of us have just kind of a dark sense of humor about, you know, working in this kind of creepy, sketchy building late at night all by ourselves, and, you know, you kind of almost have to have that dark sense of humor. Part of it is that it is, because the novel is horror, it also does help to have that tension break, because, you know, if you have nothing but just tension, scares, after a while you get kind of, you just kind of get immune to it. But like it's been said already, it's like it really just has to flow naturally out of it. In the steampunk, when I'm writing humor, that writes just out of the fact that the characters are people that I've gotten to know really well, and it's like I just, you know, yeah, they're gonna have jokes, you know, crack jokes with each other. You know, one of my favorite scenes in it is we in the book that I've got coming out is I've got a couple of characters who go swimming in Hawaii. And of course, you know, these are Victorian era characters, and we have our straight-laced sheriff from the Old West who's gone to Hawaii and he's put in one of those Victorian swimsuits with the big stripes and all, and leave very little to the imagination. You know, it just writes itself after a while. But you know, it's that, you know, you really have to let it just flow out of the fiction, out of the situations that you create, and I think it is just who we are as people. Humor is part of us. It's like, do you put romance in your fiction? Well, romance is part of life. Humor is part of life.
Mm-hmm. There's two things that I like to see in fiction, especially science fiction: humor and food. Because I don't like you know the gray food cube stuff that they do a lot of times. You know, I want real food, and they've proven that you can do real food in space. So it's just part of who we are: food and humor. And we talked about not forcing it, right? It's got to be part of it. Have you ever just written something and said, I'm going to throw a joke in here, and then realize, no, that doesn't work, and just completely change it?
No, I can't. It only comes once I've really gotten a handle on the characters. And it's just what they'll say. And it usually is this sort of, it usually stems from the absurdity of the situation, and then I'll have a character that just wouldn't crack, make a wisecrack. I tend to test people with humor when I meet them, and it can be really disconcerting, but I'm always like, it's just like a way to read someone, right? Are you someone that can laugh at yourself or laugh at me, or are you someone that's going to be like really serious and nervous and stuff? So sometimes if I do that to anybody, it's just me being strange, And so I see that actually happen in my work. Where it's like they're kind of testing. And typically I write these super dangerous characters, like they're like fighters, and they're very, I don't know what the body count in my last in the series I just wrapped up. It's probably in the hundreds.
You don't keep a spreadsheet?
Yeah, I should. Someday I should, yeah. Like, wasn't it Game of Thrones where somebody took like all of them and they put a little yellow sticky when someone died? And it was like, shoo, yellow stickies. And yeah, we're approaching that. And so, and this guy has depression. The main character is depressed. And he has, it's not too much of a spoiler, but he has a spirit inside him that helps him fight, helps him sort of do things. And that's the sidekick that cracks jokes. And he also has there is actually another character in there too that cracks jokes at his expense. But when you're someone dangerous and you have someone inside your own head cracking jokes, it's like the irony of he can't do anything about it. He can't, ordinarily he might just smack somebody that would make fun of him, and he's stuck. He's stuck with that, It's probably me turning the screw a little more too, which is always kind of fun.
I think as readers especially, we're kind of drawn to humor. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Do you like to see humor in your fiction when you're reading it?
Yeah.
Contrast.
A little bit, right?
And I think there's generally not enough in science fiction.
And I was going to say the exact same thing about epic fantasy. I wish there was, I wish there were more.
And it doesn't have to be necessarily a joke.
No.
It can just be something humorous. Has anybody read Leviathan Wakes by James S. A. Corey?
Oh, yes.
They were here last year, Daniel and Ty, at Mile High Con. And it's a very serious space opera, right? However, Holden, the captain of the Rocinante, has to have his coffee. And there's no funnier moment for me than when the ship gets shot up and one of the casualties is the coffee maker.
Oh dear.
And for the next couple of chapters, until Alex gets around, or Amos gets around to fixing the coffee maker, Holden is a grumpy SOB. And he's constantly thinking about, I want my coffee. Why can't they fix the coffee maker? Oh, the engines are down?
There goes my coffee.
I guess we gotta prioritize. Sure, work on the engines, but if you can get the coffee maker up in the hierarchy of the top 10 things you need to fix, I really appreciate it.
Right.
That kind of stuff to me is hilarious, right? As I have gone to the coffee shop here in the hotel enough times that when I walk in now, they already start making it for me.
Right. Oh, that reminds me of Mazarcus Williams, who's a fantasy writer, and the post from Facebook today was something like, and I suppose it was time for my coffee maker to break and blow up all over my kitchen, or something like that. And I mean, there was like a slew of, it was like someone died. It was really funny.
The first time I heard about Betsy, it was in relation to her blog, which was writing sex scenes at Starbucks.
Sex scenes at Starbucks.
Sex scenes at Starbucks.
Yeah.
I immediately laughed, right? Because it's what's his name? John Scalzi has said, when you're a writer and you're at Starbucks and you've got your laptop, we know what you're doing. We know. Everybody knows. We know what you're doing. So that cracked me up. And I think that's why I probably get along so well with Betsy.
Yeah.
What do you look for? I mean, when you're reading fiction, when you're going out and trying to read something, what appeals to you? Do you specifically look for things that you know are going to be kind of humorous?
Well, I look for things that are going to be feel real, which that's going to include humor. Now, I do sometimes look for things that are humorous. The Chicks and Chainmail series. I absolutely adored what Esther did with those. And they are all very humorous. That's the whole point of those books. Is they're making fun of the whole chainmail bikini sword and sorcery genre. And it is great what they do. And I really love those. But I don't specifically go and pick up humorous books. Those are the only ones I've ever went for that I know started out being humorous. But I want books to feel real. And that includes having humor. If they're too serious, it becomes sterile. in my opinion, if the world is that serious. It's sterile.
Because we also, as readers, we want to escape.
Right.
And maybe our lives suck, and so we don't want to read about someone else's life who sucks.
Right, and I have a very twisted sense of humor myself after being
See?
married.
Best friends forever.
My husband's retired military, so 20 plus years there, and I did 10 years in law enforcement. So yes, I have a very warped sense of humor. My son's an EMT and my husband's now in law enforcement, so it has continued building.
So do you have that darker sense of humor a little bit?
I do, and I try not to put that in the books. The last short story that I wrote that I intended to be humorous opens with the line, all these men running around with swords, I knew somebody was going to get hurt. I just didn't know it was going to be me. And that's the opening line.
How about you, David?
Well, I think, there's, when I go read, and for 10 years before this, I also edited a magazine called Tales of the Talisman. And the same sort of thing. I like humorous fiction. I like fiction that sets out to be humorous. But I think there is, the tricky part of that is a lot of times it's all in the setup of it. An example of that is I just read a story I had actually sold to Carol a while back called The Zombie Shortage. And the title almost sets up the humor in the story. The story itself isn't really all that funny till you get to the end and you start putting it all together. But I think that the whole idea is a lot of times the funny stories are just really setting up kind of the absurd situation and letting people play off of them. And I think of Robert Asprin's fantasy series, the Myth series. I think is one I just absolutely love, and it's. He actually plays them pretty straight through there. It's just he keeps setting them into these absurd situations that they have to face and letting them deal with them. I think that can work really well. Hitchhiker's Guide is kind of that
yes.
way.
Yes.
So
It's more the situation that you put straight, believable characters into horrible.
there are a couple of writers who basically reading them made me feel like it's okay to put humor in your writing. One of them was Douglas Adams, the other one was Terry Pratchett. Right? And if you haven't read their stuff, please go read it. And sometimes it's very, very British, which means it's very dry. But you crack up. You really do. What do you think about the trend now of authors basically writing to their audience and putting a lot of pop culture references and nerdy references in to kind of make us smile and laugh?
I think there's a place for it, but I think there's a danger of it dating the fiction.
Yes.
I think I think if it is actually contemporary fiction and it's going to be dated anyway, I think it works just fine because it then sits in its time and its place. But I think you do have to be careful with it. Use it sparingly if you're using it in science fiction or something fantasy or something that's going to last.
What about something like Ready Player One?
Now that's a good question. That's well, Ready Player One kind of is a novel of its time and place. I think. I think it will be dated, but it will always read as a 20-teens novel.
Well, okay. What about Red Shirts?
That's a good.
John Scalzi, right? I mean, that's basically, there's a lot of humor in that, and it all goes back to something that we all understand, which is red shirts.
Mm-hmm.
The old story goes, a stormtrooper and a red shirt met on a planet. Stormtrooper shot his gun until it died. Red shirt never got hit, died anyway.
I thought it was a football reference.
There will come a time when something like that becomes dated if people lose the references.
Right.
But Star Trek and Star Trek are so popular, it's hard to perceive a time when people would not understand those references.
And what's interesting about that is Star Trek even attempted to subvert the whole red shirt thing itself by putting command in red shirts in Next Generation. I always figured it was the security union made them do that. Captain Picard, you're wearing a red shirt.
Well,
And Tasha Yar still died, so.
and honestly, who was the most badass character on the entire Enterprise? It was Scotty, because he had that red shirt and he went on away missions.
Exactly.
So the lesson is, if you wear a red shirt on the Enterprise, speak in a Scottish accent.
What do you think, Betsy? What do you think about, contemporary stuff and trying to mix that in like a Ready Player One or a Red Shirts?
It's funny that you brought it up, just because I'm thinking of some of the technology in my urban fantasy that's like so now out of date that it really probably needs to be worked on. I think, we talked a little bit about this actually in the superhero movie panel earlier. That you're trying to always relate to such a broad audience that it's fine, I think, to have references, because not everybody's going to get it always, but that's often okay. I think a lot of readers and a lot of people will just accept, or they might even go look it up because they want to know what it is. But some references like that might seem super clever if you get the joke, but if you don't, they're not going to be in the way. As long as they're not, so that you have to get the joke in order to continue with the story. And I think it's probably pretty easy to slip stuff in, and somebody could keep reading or keep watching and not necessarily. I would be a person who would miss references. Like, I didn't read a lot of comics growing up. I didn't read any comics growing up. There's a lot of geek culture that I'm not really associated with, and I'm not a fan of certain things. So I would miss probably a lot of references.
And that's a good point I want to talk about.
But I don't think I'd care.
You had a question for a while.
Well, there's a twofold challenge when you're writing a period piece or a fantasy piece. It has to be something that the people at the time would find funny, and the people of our time will find funny. So if you can crack 1940s humor, and people are somewhat familiar with that because they've watched the war movies and they get some of the cultural references. But if you say, lay that pistol down, people don't understand that's a very popular 40s jazzy, happy song. And people might think you were actually worried about somebody laying that pistol down. So it's much harder for a period piece to find, you have to work on two levels. It has to be funny to them and funny to your reader.
So that brings to mind subjective, right? Humor is subjective.
Yes.
And for someone like myself who came through, grew up in the 70s and the 80s, something like Ready Player One has a ton of references for me. But if you were born in the 80s, right, and you kind of hit your stride in the 90s, a lot of that humor is going to go right over your head.
Right.
What about the delicate balance of subjective humor?
That's a hard one. It is very delicate, because you want to appeal to as many people as possible, but you also don't want to try and limit yourself. If you try and shoebox your humor in such a way to make it appeal to all of these people by eliminating stuff, your world's going to feel forced.
Yeah.
It still has to flow from the characters in your world, such as doing a period piece. You've got to know what was popular then, but you also need to know exactly how that translates to today's audience. So if your characters, if you know it's going to be something that seems odd, you can have a character look at somebody quizzically. And it's never fun to explain a joke, but you can have fun trying to as well, and maybe add to the humor that way.
Well, and to your point, what was funny in the 20s, 30s, 40s
is not funny
could
now.
be not only not funny now, could actually be insulting.
Yes, it could be
and
very offensive.
Offensive, yeah.
Exactly. So again, you have to be very careful with that. It's a very, very fine balance. Sometimes it's better to make up your own, particularly if you're writing fantasy, writing future sci-fi, make up your own stuff. The audience will extrapolate.
Yeah.
Remember, something Gene Roddenberry said, the audience ain't stupid. Or, it's credited. He believed that the audience had intelligence. He did not think you had to sit down and explain everything to the audience. Assume your audience is intelligent.
Which is a great point. And leads me to a wonderful point that David's going to make now. Go ahead.
Well, and the wonderful point, or maybe not so wonderful point I was just going to make, is I think a very talented writer like Klein or Scalzi or these guys, they write the jokes such that even if you don't get the cultural references, it's still going to work at a level. Hopefully it'll work as funny. I think like particularly in terms of red shirts, you know, you can figure out the whole notion of the red shirts are the guys that get shot pretty fast, even if you've somehow managed to never see Star Trek. You know, you'll get the whole idea that they're the cannon fodder pretty fast, and then you can still play on the humor of that without having to really explain the joke.
Is there a specific genre that lends itself to humor over others?
You know, I think all genres kind of can lend themselves to humor.
Would you see it more in
I think,
steampunk versus space opera?
well, you know, I don't see very much steampunk humor. I think that's something that needs to be there more. But I think I see kind of more fantasy humor, kind of more contemporary humor, kind of more. I see more of the deliberate humor, like Terry Pratchett.
Agatha Heterodyne, Heterodyne rather,
Right, Agatha Heterodyne
who
would
is
be.
definitely steampunkish. Clanks.
Yeah, and that's actually, in some ways, I kind of consider her those light stories, they do have a lot of humor in them, certainly.
Was that your question? Or?
No, I was sort of just. I had a question earlier, but now I forget what it is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Carol, what do you think? Is there a specific genre that lends itself better to the use of humor?
No, I don't. I think every genre can be equally humorous.
Okay.
It's just a matter of the characters, the author, the world, the setting. Go for it.
Betsy, you're nodding?
Yeah, I think I can't really think of a genre that couldn't probably use an injection of humor at some point. I mean, honestly, I don't read steampunk because I find a lot of steampunk kind of dry. And I just haven't found that sort of funny, or something with a little, life to it like that.
Parasol Protector.
Yeah, I was going to say, Carol.
I have read a little bit of that, yeah.
And if that doesn't do it for you, curtsies and
I have.
conspiracies. Which is like,
I'm friends with Gail, yeah.
do you have a, yeah, God, I get emails all the time. Do you have a favorite, like, example of humor in fiction? I mean, we talked about Pratchett.
Yeah, I mean, I do love Pratchett. I probably could think of something. I wouldn't be able to think of the title of a book or something. It's been on my mind a lot, and it's not a book, and it's not, so it totally does not fit the question. And it's actually a television show, and it's not speculative at all. But there's a show, it's kind of reminding me from the British humor. There's a show called Monarch of the Glen. It's kind of an older show. It's on Netflix. It's really worth just for quirky, funny characters. And I think that is something like British humor does really well. You could just giggle your way through a show at these characters, but they're totally being themselves and serious and doing their thing. And it's just so, it's so funny, the situations that the writers put some of these characters in. And of course, I think it works best if you have a straight man. You've got to have somebody that all that bounces off, so the viewer or the reader has someone to sort of identify with. But it's the humor in that was awesome, and they actually it's not too much of a spoiler to say because it's been out obviously for 10 years or something. But the main really funny guy actually dies, and the show just totally lost its spark. A few funny little things happen, but it's just not the same. And it was funny watching it because I didn't even realize how he was the center of the humor in the show until he was not there. Again, and now I kind of gave up watching it without him because I love that
Carol, how about you?
quirky stuff.
Well, the Chicks and Chainmail anthologies, I think those were really well done. They're definitely poking fun at themselves. Esker put together some wonderful stories in that collection. There was a novel that actually came out of that by Margaret Ball called Mathemagics, using math as measurement formulas, which is actually quite good. I haven't read them in a while because they just finally got monotonous in a way, was the early Piers Anthony Sand books. But they've become so overrun with puns now, they're no longer punny. But yeah, I really enjoyed the early ones because there was a good story as well as all of the humorous puns that were in those.
So,
I actually remember what it was.
Okay.
Which was about red shirts
Uh-huh.
and the trope of the red shirts. Think of the British soldiers in the Revolutionary War, of whom the locals thought they were just about that silly. There they are, bright red, target on their chest and white, ho ho.
Well, that was also, and it's a completely different topic, but that was also the end of gentleman warfare. Because at that point, the British Army was the scariest army in the world, right? And it was because the way warfare was conducted was everybody came to the battleground, right? Set up their camp, had tea, and then everybody, not before morning, but you lined up at a certain time, and everybody lined up, and then you just kind of shot back and forth until everybody was dead. It was gentlemanly warfare. And
everyone wore bright colored uniforms out on the field.
So they could be easily spotted.
And what happened was
Cross
Americans,
over the chest.
right, and what happened was Americans go, wait a minute, if I stay in the tree, behind the bushes and stuff, I can shoot them, and they can't shoot me. And it was the end of gentlemanly warfare.
Right. And we also understood shoot the officers because the soldiers just scatter.
Which was considered horribly rude.
I'm sure.
It was like the rudest thing you could do. Why would you go after the gentleman room, right? That's just.
There actually was a military reason for that. The idea that the soldiers were not disciplined enough to control themselves without the officers. By taking out the officers, you basically are releasing these hooligans upon the populace who may not be involved in the warfare.
And there's also, the other military reason is that officers can surrender.
Yes.
And civilians don't necessarily have the
Option.
don't have the option or the authority to surrender to your enemy.
So same question to you about like favorites and.
So I think that one of the places that really brought humor alive, there's a couple of them I can think of. Probably the first, chronologically, would be like Douglas Adams' scripts for Doctor Who. I think about just some of the funny moments that get injected in there, and it. Doctor Who's always kind of been light, but then I think of Firefly and just some of the little one-liners that would come up in there as being just really great moments.
If you don't hear from me, I want you to take the ship and come get me.
No.
Ship?
Exactly. And it's that playing off the unexpected. You get used to that sort of wound up tight science fiction,
Right.
I'm Captain Kirk, get the ship out of here,
Well, one of my favorite lines from Doctor Who is from Tom Baker years, and he's explaining something, as he always does, to the local Earth scientist, and their local Earth scientist says, I think I understand. And Doctor Who says, I'm sure you don't, but it's so kind of you to try.
I remember that, actually.
Yeah.
I remember that line.
Would you care for a jelly baby?
And it's just that subversion of some of these ideas. I think it just is wonderful.
Well, that one Stargate episode when they got the new fighters and flying with Carter, and it's like we got the deflector screens, and he's like phasers. Sorry, sir.
Yeah. Or when they had the X-302, the big battleship, and O'Neill comes off the bridge, and he says, "Well, the president didn't go for it." She says, "Sir, I'm sorry they didn't want to name it Enterprise." Come on, crying out loud! What else are we gonna call it?
You have to admire how Tangled began. This is how I died. But that's okay. I mean, that's from the very beginning. It sets off a paradox, which is funny, and it also says it's going to be subversive. I mean, one of the most sacred of all Hollywood movies is Sunset Boulevard, which is being narrated by a dead man. But then they're going to take that and bend it 180 degrees. It's going to be epic, but it's going to be subversive. And they set that from the very first sentence of the film, and that's an achievement.
It is, yes. So some of my favorite fiction that has humor in it is obviously Gail Carriger. I love The Parasol Protectorate. She tricked me into reading a romance novel. Totally tricked me, big time. The Harry Dresden books, I love the humor through there. It's very nerdy. It speaks to me as a Spider-Man fan, because Dresden is definitely a Spider-Man fan. Butcher actually wrote for sfsignal.com, which is the website that I do stuff for, wrote a letter from Harry Dresden to the fans saying, this Butcher guy keeps writing about my life, but he always picks the worst damn weekend of my life during the year. He never tells you the rest of the year. It's always that really bad weekend. It was the funniest damn letter. I read, and it's from a character, right? Coming to you. So I love that kind of stuff. I love the colors of magic, right? And the Pratchett kind of humor. Is there any ever like a point where it doesn't work?
Oh, no, well, I just wanted to mention, one of my favorite Supernatural episodes is when they find their own slash fiction on.
Oh, yes.
So.
And Dean's like, we're brothers. It sounds like, Dean, they don't care. These people are sick.
I mean, and there's so many funny moments, and that show is so. They do these horrible, live this horrible, grim existence, really, out of a rattle-trap car, and yet the one-liners are just always. And that is a little bit sidekicky feeling, just not the Dean's sidekick, but just you've got Sam who just constantly takes himself so seriously and with reason, and then Dean will make the comments. But I love that too when that gets switched, and then Sam will suddenly make the crack, and Dean often doesn't quite know what to make of that.
Occasionally, I'll tweet something after some, like a Supernatural binge or something, because I'll DVR them and watch them. And I mean, all you have to do is one word: idiots.
Yeah.
They know they're talking about Uncle Bobby, right?
Yeah.
And that's a show where, I mean, you want to talk about like Tuckerization and kind of humor.
Yeah.
Robert Singer is an executive producer on the show, and then you have Uncle Bobby Singer on the show. I mean, you can't get any more meta than that.
And Felicity on
They bring
Arrow,
that up,
I love
like, in
her.
the show.
I love her little. Yeah.
The French mistake.
Yeah.
Like,
I love.
name a character after
And
yourself.
to bring it back to something I said earlier, in one of, I think the first season or maybe the second season of Supernatural, they had to go to Hollywood to investigate death on a movie set, and they're on the little tram doing the tour, and Sam's sitting there, and the person operating the tram says, and now we're going into the sets of Stars Hollow from the Gilmore Girls, and he goes, let's get off. And Dean's like, what? He's like, come on, let's go. I don't want to go anymore. And they walk off because they don't want to go through Stars Hollow, which is where he was one of the characters on there. But we kind of went into television and movies a little bit. But anything where you think it doesn't work?
Where it doesn't work. We run across it at the magazine because we have different styles of humor. I will say I usually win. Well, we have veto power, so. But I have one of the editors there. Just her sense of humor is just different than mine, and so fortunately there are three of us, so we've always had a tiebreaker. So if one of us doesn't like it, then the other one can either yay or nay. But we've run across that a lot where something is meant to be funny and it just, to me, it's falling flat, or to her, like I do like dark humor and she's not likes as much dark humor, and so sometimes for her it's like, it's just not working for me. That's really kind of where I see most humor not working.
What about you, Carol?
Pretty much the same. It comes into a matter of, to me, what feels forced.
Yeah.
If for some reason it feels like you're trying to force the
Yeah.
humor or overdo it, then that's what doesn't work for me. It has to be very much part of flow, as part of the story, part of the character, and feel natural. Don't set somebody, don't put a banana peel in the middle of the floor just because you're trying to do something
I ain't
humorous.
gonna fall for no banana in the tailpipe.
It don't work. It don't work.
How about you?
Yeah, from the editing perspective, definitely see those stories that fall flat. And I think they fall flat exactly because when they fall flat because someone really tried to force a humorous situation that didn't belong there. They're trying to create the humor. I was actually kind of going back and thinking about other literary sources of humor. I think a couple of authors that don't get a lot of credit are Ernest Hogan is one that I think is actually a lot of fun. He's written some books like High Aztec and The Smoking Mirror Blues. I think he's got a very good sense of humor, but again, it's that sort of outrageous situation. Also, C.J. Henderson, who just passed away, is, I think, kind of writes the space opera humor very well. But that gets away from your question, which was but I think we've already answered that one. So.
Well, and I have an urban fantasy that I've been shopping around for a while now, and I injected humor into it. Because when I first wrote it, I was very straight and very no humor. And then I started reading things like Butcher and Gail Carriger, and oh my God, I was just laughing so hard. So I thought, oh, it kind of gave me permission to put humor. I realized it is okay to have humor in fiction. So anyway, I had this very funny scene where my police detective is traveling with a wizard, and they break into this house looking for evidence. And he breaks in and he does all this conjuring and conjures these lights that he sends out, and he's doing all this stuff. And the police detective just reaches in and flips the light switch on. He goes, ta-da! We have about 10 minutes. Any questions from the audience? I know we've had a few.
I can't believe nobody's brought up Tyrion yet.
Tyrion Lannister?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, he's just constant.
By the way, George R. R. Martin, wonderful guy. He throws a party at Worldcon every year. If he invites you to the party, please come. If he invites you to a wedding, say no.
There's cases where a failed joke can actually be a very effective trope for you as well. In the climax of Little Big Man's life is saved on the battlefield by the Cheyenne who hated him all his life and wanted to kill him all his life, but he saves him because he owed him a life. And then they shake hands in friendship, and he pulls out, and there's a dead trooper's hand in the other guy's sleeve. And he pulls out, and it's a horrible joke. It's not funny. Little Big Man is left standing on the battlefield holding, and the other guy's going, good joke, but now I can kill you. And you're going, that works because as a failed joke, jokes fall flat too. And it's unnatural to have every joke in a story be brilliant and scintillating and hilarious. A failed joke is also useful. So this is it. We're all going to die. Yes.
That's Dustin Hoffman?
The movie, it's not in the movie, it's in the book.
Oh,
Thomas
okay.
Berger, who was a heck of a humorous writer. He could have a lot of great jokes.
And that could have been a whole other topic, like novels and stories that have been translated into film that didn't work quite well.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah, the humor didn't translate.
Yeah.
That
Actually,
would take
the movie's
almost
great
the
too, but
entire
it just
plot.
was
I know, right?
Yeah.
MB, you had a question? Any questions at all? None? Okay.
Well, like if we poll the audience as to what their humorous books are, because I'm curious, because I'm always looking for something really funny, and I have read some past stuff, but Ready Player One was one of the ones that actually has some humor to it, because he's constantly making fun of himself, or trying to advance himself and so forth.
Sometimes the humor is subtle too, and so it's not. I'm a fan of the Wheel of Time. And it's funny because I always go and especially amongst authors, I'll say, who's read The Wheel of Time? And people are like, oh no, what was it, like 19 books now? I always thought it was very humorous the way that he set up, it's almost like friends or coupling. It's like what the guys think versus what the girls think, right? And so you would see, the guys talking about how crazy the girls are and they don't understand anything that's going on. But Rand would always go, I wish Perrin was here because Perrin understands women. And then Perrin and Matt would be talking, and Perrin's going, God, I wish Rand was here because he understands women. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And then you go to the women, and they're going, what is up with these wool-headed sheep herders?
They don't get us at all.
And I remember there was like 3 or 4 books, and it comes to the point where the Ale are there, and the Ale have this really strange sense of humor, and they're really getting on Rand because he never laughs. He's always so stoic and all this kind of stuff. And like, can't you just laugh once in a while? And he just stops dead, and he tells a joke. And the Ale are sitting there going, was that a joke? Is that supposed to be funny? What's the punchline? Was it the tree? Was it, I don't understand, was it this and that? And he's just like, and just walks on. So that kind of lends to subjective humor, right? It's not going to be good for everybody. Any other questions? Comments? In the back, Air Force.
What book someone told you had to read that was just so funny you can't believe it, and you read it and you couldn't believe it because you didn't find it funny?
Well, the one that I read that was super funny and I couldn't believe how funny it was, Q and Law. Peter David,
Yes, that
Star
was
Trek: The Next
great.
Generation. You have Q marrying Loxana Troy. Yes.
Yes.
How about you?
Actually, some of the Pratchett books don't work for me, and I don't know if it's almost like because I read several at once, and maybe I hit a wall with it or something. And it's been too long, I can't even remember like titles, but it was sort of a okay, here we go again. Same, it started to kind of slide for me, and I do think reading, the reader is half the equation. Any writer worth their salt knows that. And so all you can do as a writer is write it for yourself and write what you think is funny and what makes you laugh as you're doing it, or at least chuckle. And some people are going to find it funny and other people aren't, and you don't have a lot of control over that. And you might, like in my case, find it funny at one point and then find it not funny later. I don't know if I read some of the Pratchett books now if I would find them as funny as I did maybe 10 years ago, just because
Because you changed too.
Yeah.
And what you find
Yeah.
funny before is I used to love Beavis and Butthead, but I don't think it was.
What is it? Omen? You wrote it.
Good Omens?
Good Omens. I mean, to me, that's just such a funny book. It's just, there's just one after another little funny quirk that, I just laugh my way through that book. And I think that is a book I probably could pick it up again and still think is funny.
Carol?
I'm not sure.
Not sure?
I'm really not sure. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that either was surprised as far as being that funny or was just like, what in the world? Yeah, because
I will throw out there the audiobook, narrated by R.C. Bray of The Martian, is actually hilarious to me. I mean, just the way he brings that character to life from the get-go is wonderful. So that's a good one. What would be you, David?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the things that didn't work for me, again, I kind of almost come back to some of the submissions, and there's really nothing I can really mention just from that point of view, but just in the sense of, people who've written, who submitted things that have really good resumes sometimes, and then they send me a story, and of course maybe by the time they've sent to a small press magazine and they have really good resumes, maybe that should tell me that no, it's not working by that point. But I can kind of think of some cases of stories that way that have not worked for me. People who I've otherwise seen really funny stuff. And one person, I'll take his name in vain, I don't think he'd mind, would be C.J. Henderson was one of those people. He did some writing for I think it was Batman for a while in DC, but also wrote a really funny book, Baby's First Mythos, which is well worth checking out. But some of the stuff you would send to me, it just wouldn't work, and I didn't buy it, so you weren't subjected to it.
And I'll throw it out there, the Q and Law and Q Squared and those audio, if you can find the audiobooks, John Delancey and Majel Barrett actually did them, and they will make you pee your pants. The DASPA member in the back.
Yes, I've got a couple of examples of rather older humor in science fiction. Harry Harrison, Slippery Jim DeGriz, the stainless steel rat series. The other is Keith Laumer's or Keith series, which to my mind is not only a send-up of State Department diplomacy, it's also a send-up of James Bond.
I will throw out there also, you may have seen him wandering around the con eventually, Mario Acevedo. Has such a wit and humor. I mean, just talking to him, he has such a wit and humor, and he puts that into his books, which are up in the dealer's room.
Adam Rex did a book called The True Meaning of Smack Day, and you want both the book because he does drawings in it that are hysterical, and you want the audiobook because the person who does the voice of the alien does not sound human, and it's hysterical. It's one of the few ones where I'm like, choose one or the other. No, you have to get them both because they're both hysterical in their own way.
I recommend the old classic Lord of the Rings. If you've ever overdosed on Tolkien, it's a real good antidote.
Well, believe it or not, we are out of time. I want to thank Betsy, Carol, and David for being here. Thank all of you for showing up and being so cool and awesome. Don't forget, dealer's room, go buy some stuff. Support your authors.